Now you can join Planet Fitness and get the PF Black Card for zero enrollment, $24.99 a month, and get all the perks.
I love perks.
Do you love having access to 2,000 plus locations?
Yes.
Bringing a friend every time?
#friend goals.
And recovering with massage chairs?
Who doesn't?
Get the PF Black Card and feel spectacular. Zero enrollment, $24.99 a month. See Club for details.
Ew, gotta get rid of this old Backstreet Boys t-shirt.
Tell me why.
Because it stinks, boys.
Tell me why.
I've washed it so many times, but the odor won't come out.
Tell me why.
No, you tell me why I can't get rid of this odor.
Have you tried Downy Rinse and Refresh? It doesn't just cover up odors, it helps remove them.
Wow, it worked, guys.
Yeah.
Downy Rinse and Refresh removes more odor in one wash than the leading value detergent in 3 washes. Find it wherever you buy laundry products.
At ShopRite, we have taken our already low prices and we've locked them in so you can save on your faves. Assorted varieties of Ronzoni pasta are 4 for $5. Check out locked in prices at ShopRite.
Welcome to the #1 podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
Oh, no problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade 2s for 3s. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod here to preview the next game for Michigan State, the Butler Bulldogs of the Big East Conference. This is the Swan song for the Gavitt Games, a tournament matchup between the Big East and Big Ten that sort of existed and had teams occasionally compete against each other at completely random times. It claimed about as much media fanfare, I think, as the like a Wednesday night matchup between Cal State Polytechnic and East Tennessee State. So Gavitt Games, we hardly knew ye. If you're like me...
Okay, I'm gonna disagree with that slightly, and I say this as someone who's been a skeptic of the Gavitt Games basically since it began, mostly because from a Michigan
We're not even sure when it
State-centric
began, right?
Well, that's a good point. I can't tell you exactly. I want to say it's been at least 6 or 7 years, maybe even a little longer. But if you remember, MSU didn't participate the first few go-arounds. I think it was the first 2 or 3 years MSU was out. But my take on it was, from an MSU-centric perspective, there have been years where the Gavitt Games seemed like one difficult game too many for MSU. Because let's remember, MSU came into every season minimum locked into the Champions Classic and the ACC Challenge.
Right.
Okay, so no matter what else they did, and then you could add on top of that sometimes a 2, but more often a 3-game Thanksgiving week tournament that would also present usually at least 2, and again, sometimes 3 difficult games to one degree or another. So, and that's on top of years where they play somebody on an aircraft carrier or Izzo just decides to do a home and home, can get somebody to agree to do a home and home. So my feeling was, especially when the Big Ten went from 18 to 20 a couple of years ago, well, more than that now, but it just felt to me like, God, this is one game too many. You know, I'm all for the challenges, but of playing good opponents, but you do need games where you can work on yourself. Like, to be honest, this year, the way things have unfolded, and it's not that, Butler is a juggernaut, but I would rather be seeing a team that I felt Michigan State no matter what they did, was likely to win by 20 plus.
Sure.
I feel like at this point, after what has happened thus far, they could use another one of those get right games where you're not worried about winning and losing, you're worried about the score, but it's not to be, and so we have it. All that said, I think you're right about some of it regarding the Gavitt Games, and then maybe I disagree with a little bit of it. You're right in that it's never captured the imagination or anything close to the way the ACC Challenge did. And a big part of that, I think, is what you said, that you don't have every team from each conference because they don't have the same number of members. So you can't have everybody participating. And so that's been a problem. And then just the fact that the games get spread out over what? It's like 5 days, right?
Well, more. I mean, I think they played middle of the season before. I feel like we played Georgetown like in January.
Well, no, that was a different. That wasn't Gavitt Games.
That was
a
okay,
one-off.
Right.
That was a one-off. No, but they play it. I think the way it goes is they usually start on Monday, they end on Friday. I want to say the Big Ten ACC Challenge is played over 3 days.
Yeah, it was really 2, but it might have gotten to 3 when
I think it got to 3
bigger
in the last few years when the leagues got a little bigger. I think it used to be over 2 for sure. That's a difference too, that it's just dragged out. You've only got a couple games each night. And you're like, okay, who cares? And then the other reality is, look, and this is no offense to the Big East. The Big East has history as a great basketball league. It is currently a great basketball league, but it does not have the same kind of draw for Big Ten fans, I think, as the ACC does. And the reasons for that have to do with the fact that they're bigger schools typically in the ACC. They're schools that also have football programs, which not all of the Big East has. Sure. So it's complicated. And despite how things have been in recent years with the ACC, which is amazing to me that it's fallen as much as it has as a basketball league in recent years. Historically, the ACC and the Big Ten tended to be the 2 leagues at the top of the pile nationally. And there's a reason there was a Big Ten ACC Challenge, and that was
right.
Those two things were it, So that's where you're absolutely right. But that said, there have been some really good games in this thing.
Sure.
And if you think about and so certain individual matchups, I think, do have pull, do make you kind of look at when you see them pop up on the schedule and say, that's a really good game. And especially because the nice thing about it is, like the Big Ten ACC Challenge, it is a home or road event. It's not neutral site stuff, which I understand why that happens in November and December. There are legitimate reasons for it. And if my choices as a fan are, do I get to see good teams play each other, but it has to be at a neutral site? Or do I not get to see good teams play against each other because they refuse to play home and home and they can't play at a neutral site? I'll take the former. I want the matchups, first of all, but there is something different and interesting about home and road matchups. It was the same way in the Big Ten ACC Challenge. So this one, maybe not. I mean, I try to think about it. What were the big time games MSU played in this event? I would say the year in 2019 where they went to Seton Hall to play them and won it in a very, very close game. That
coming out party there.
Exactly. As a freshman. Yep, it was. And it was Cassius Winston senior year. And, Cash was struggling for obvious reasons at the time, but he came around and made some big plays at the end. That was a good game. Last year's game against Villanova, unfortunately, got to be at least interesting. MSU controlled it most of the way, but Villanova's a big name, so even though they weren't a great team by their standards, that one had a little bit of juice. Not too many others for MSU. I mean, when I try to think about that event and think about who the hell they've played, that's the only time I think they drew Villanova. UConn wasn't in the Big East for most of the events run, I don't think, so they've never played UConn in it. God, I just don't know. I mean, they haven't played Georgetown in it. And they haven't played Providence. I mean, MSU just hasn't played a lot of games in this thing. So goodbye, Gavitt Games. We hardly knew ye. I guess is the.
I think the one thing I'd say is a couple things. So one is, the Big East doesn't have the cachet that an ACC, for the points you mentioned, they're not football schools.
I think that's fair. And that's not a knock on the Big East. It's
just a reality of what it is. Right. And there aren't as many basketball fans as there are football fans in general, who watching college sports.
And this brings up just a quick aside. Some listeners may have seen, there's a writer who's New York based named Adam Zagoria. He goes by Zags, which is the first sign of the kind of person that he is. But he's been banging the drum the last couple of days on why UConn doesn't replace Michigan State in the Champions Classic. And as people have tried, first of all, we can debate. There's a debate. His point is they've won 5 national titles. I can counter with some stuff if we really want to go there. But that's all subjective. You can have that disagreement. But as I've seen a few people point out to him in his mentions, the event is a made-for-TV event. By the way, the creation of Mark Hollis, the AD at Michigan State at the time. So start with that. But the thing you gotta and I don't know whether he's willfully ignorant of this or actually ignorant, but the idea behind that event is you wanted to have teams from the 4 major conferences. And I'm sorry, the Big East and the Pac whatever get left out of that discussion for good reason. You know why? Money. And it's related to ratings.
Eyeballs.
That's what it's about. So look, if somebody wanted to bitch about not being included in that event, I could think of 2 schools right away who have a better case than UConn certainly does, North Carolina and UCLA. Okay? Why are they not in it? There's already an ACC team in it. That's why Carolina's out. And the Pac-12 doesn't mean anything in terms of viewership. That's why UCLA didn't get
I don't know what that is anymore.
Well, the former Pac-12.
Yeah, right.
But that's why.
Yeah.
Pretty simple, but I guess it gets past some people. So anyway, sorry, I digress.
No, that's
you were
okay.
Make a point.
That's the other point was just that the fan bases and the amount of eyeballs that follow those schools are much smaller. There's much smaller schools than the Big Ten and ACC schools, right? That's just reality as well. And so
that's one part of it.
Less ratings.
That's one part of it.
The only thing I can say is from a marketing standpoint, this has been a mismarketed tournament. Like you could have it over 5 days and that'd be fine. But you have to say it's the Big East versus Big Ten Gavitt Games. And we're going to, this is where the tally is. It's 0 because there's always that thing. There was, the 2 conferences are playing each other sort of in a way, right? They kind of do that with bowl games even now. What's your conference record in the bowl game? They've never done that with the marketing with the Gavitt Games. Maybe that's because they don't have I'm not sure what the TV arrangement is, if it's like all ESPN or all on Fox.
No, it's all Fox. All Fox.
It's been a mistake by Fox then to not really push that sort of aspect of it. And now, of course, it doesn't matter because it's over. And I think that's why you're just playing these teams. You're like, oh, I guess that's part of the Gavitt Games, right? Whereas if you see Georgia Tech in your schedule, well, that's part of the ACC challenge, right? I mean, those are I think one of the biggest problems with this tournament.
I think that I am loath to give credit to ESPN for anything, but one thing that's definitely true is ESPN is way ahead of Fox in terms of branding this stuff.
Yeah.
Because they kind of invented it. And, Fox is trying, like they've really worked overtime in college football to brand the big noon game in the Big Ten. So they're starting to do those things, but I think you're absolutely right. And the other thing is it's named after Dave Gavitt. Well, Dave Gavitt is an important historical figure in college basketball. He was a longtime coach at Providence, very successful. Irvin Johnson and company beat him in the NCAA tournament, Magic's freshman year, by the way. But he was a longtime successful coach, but he was really known as the guy who was the driving force behind the creation of the Big East shortly after he retired I think it might have been his last year, the year that MSU took him out. But he became the commissioner of the Big East. It was a driving force behind that league. That's all great. But that's got nothing to do with the Big Ten. I don't know why the Big Ten is part of the Gavitt Games. I mean, that's just why, okay, it's named after a guy who was a commissioner of one of the leagues.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean,
yeah, no, everything about it doesn't make any sense. And it never has.
Is Big Ten supposed to be the Washington Generals in this thing? Come on. Get the hell out. The other thing about the TV thing, just to go back to that, you were talking about those being smaller schools, and that's absolutely true. The Big East, the core of the Big East, almost all of the member schools are Catholic universities. Mm-hmm. And so they tend to be, they're all private schools. They tend to be much smaller in enrollment. We're talking about a lot of schools that maybe are in, the high 4 figures, low 5 figures in terms of enrollment. Whereas the Big Ten, you're talking about schools with 40, 50,000 students.
Yeah, right.
Big difference. But also the fan bases. If you've spent any time in the Northeast, you know this. Outside of a very few pockets, college athletics in general is very much a poor relation to the pros.
Sure.
It just is. Now, it's not as stark as it is in some ways on the West Coast, in my opinion, but it definitely, all you got to do, take a look at any of the New York City papers in the winter and see where college basketball falls. Now, there have been periods where there was an exception to that, in years when St. John's in the past was good. I think if Pitino gets them going, St. John's will be big news there. So there have been sporadic periods where that wasn't the case. UConn has a pretty good fan base, although even that, not on a Big Ten level. And guess what? Zags. That's why your boys aren't part of the Champions Classic. There it is. Hate to tell you the truth, but that's it. Michigan State's fan base is massive by comparison.
Right. And that's the allure of college, and that's the allure of college athletics, right? Because it is your alma mater. It is your relationship to the school. And if your school is small, there are just less people with that relationship, because it's not like it's a higher quality of play than professional sports. So the allure is the college aspect of it.
And the other thing is, because it's such a big deal in this part of the country, and anybody who lives in the state of Michigan listening to this knows this reality with the other school in state, you get a lot of fellow travelers who have no connection to the school other than they like the football helmet.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And that does not exist in the same way. There's an old line. I don't know if it's quite applicable anymore, but the biggest college sport fan base in New York, arguably for a long time, and again, might still be the case, I don't know, was Notre Dame because of the football program.
Yeah.
There was a term for it. They called them Subway alums. So, I mean, really, that's an actual term of art, so to speak, that was applied to that. So you don't have, St. John's does not pick up a lot of fans who don't have an affiliation to the school. So when you see, and living alumni is whatever it is, significantly smaller than any Big Ten school, that's a real number. Whereas the majority of Big Ten schools have fan bases that far outstrip the number of alums, because you got so many fellow travelers. Anybody who grows up in the state of Indiana probably roots for either Indiana or Purdue basketball if they're interested in sports at all. That's not true of somebody who's interested in sports and is living in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have a college program they give a shit about.
We have an example of that in the Big Ten, even, which is Northwestern, where you have the city of Chicago largely doesn't, I shouldn't say they don't care about Northwestern, but it's a smaller school. Its alumni base is much smaller than the other schools in the Big Ten. And it shows. I mean, even their home games, they have trouble keeping other visiting opponents, fans there. And it's, again, no knock against Northwestern, just the reality.
The only other school that probably is roughly similar, although it's bigger because their alum base is bigger, would be Rutgers.
Sure. Yep.
Right? Again, not a coincidence. Rutgers is in the Big East footprint.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It's just not, it's not the same thing. So Anyway, that's the Gavitt Games, but we got a game to play.
We got a game to play. So if you're like me and feel occasional pangs of guilt for consuming media for free while driving around your car running the treadmill, then consider financially supporting the show. For just a few bucks a month, you can be a part of the community on Patreon or Substack. We also accept support via Venmo or PayPal if you prefer. It's super helpful to the show. Find out how and get the links at tffinots.com/support. Okay, Rod, let's discuss the game Friday against Butler in East Lansing. This is the second matchup against Butler that Michigan State's had recently, and both have been at home, kind of strangely because of just
not true. Not true.
Oh, no,
they went to
that's right. They played
2 years ago.
But it's weird that they're playing the same team back to back is what I meant to say, because
no, last year they played last year they played Villanova.
I meant
it was Butler. Yeah. It was Butler, Nova, Butler.
Right. It's I guess weird that they're playing Butler twice though out of 3, which is
true.
They don't right. That's what I meant. True. More than yeah, you're right. It's not back to back because it was Villanova last year. Although it is weird they're playing at home 2 years in a row in the Gavitt Games. But whatever.
Yeah. Again, that's the nature of this. It's kind of a whatever kind of event.
It's a whatever event. Exactly.
Yeah.
And Michigan State fans are, Michigan State's coming in 1-2 with the loss to James Madison, and then the loss to Duke. Obviously beat Southern Indiana in between, and so I think there's a shakiness feeling some of the fan bases that have not been around long or they expected a lot more from this team.
No, they don't have that excuse. I don't give them that excuse. We're not talking about a bunch of 14-year-olds. No, call it what it is. And look. Is there a guarantee in life that if Michigan State gets off to a shaky start, that they automatically there's a God-given right for them to recover and make it all fine in the end? No.
No.
But 25 years of history ought to tell you that outcome, to one extent or another, is likelier than the other outcome, which is we're not going to make the tournament, which is, at this point, come on.
Yeah.
There might come a time to have those discussions. They're not here yet. Yeah. We're in the middle of November still. No, I don't give them the out card on that. What I always refer to it, I've got a line for it. No learning ever. These people, you could talk about Michigan State every year, even when it's the same guys coming back, developing collective amnesia, how to play defense together, and and I get that. That's frustrating. But there's just as much, if not more, of a sense of collective amnesia in, unfortunately, too large a portion of the fan base. That they see something like we've seen over the last, week, 10 days, and act as if they've never seen this before and it's a horror. You've seen it constantly. It's the norm. We talked about that, right? That there are these few exceptional years where MSU really had all their shit together early. 2000, 2001 is the most striking example of it. But listen, do people forget that the team that went to the national title game in 2009 and won the Big Ten, that team got run off the court in November by North Carolina at Ford Field. They got run off the court twice by North Carolina at Ford Field, but once came in November. And I remember it. There's all this buildup and hype around this team. I could cite tons. I can go back to the team that was preseason ranked number 1, the 2019-2020 MSU team. They got really outclassed by Kentucky at Champions Classic. Then they went out to Maui and lost the opener to Virginia Tech. You remember that?
Yeah.
Number 1 to unranked. So there's precedent for it. You've seen this before. That team by the end of the year was, I think, considered by most people to be at least a slight favorite to win the whole thing. We'll never know whether they would have done it or not, but that's where they were by March. So there is precedent. Lots, and I've just scratched the surface with those 2 references. I can go chapter and verse. There are tons of them. That is not to say that you excuse what's happened thus far. I think I'm going to toot our horn here. I think our coverage and responses to these 3 games, I think we've been very critical and very honest and very, very even-handed, which means there's been a lot of negative talk about their performance. But at the same time, if you watch the Duke game, and you did not see some positives there, I think you're coming in with a bias toward a negative outlook, because there were things, as we discussed, that were absolutely positive. Now, they've got to sustain those and they've got to build on them. And those things aren't given either. You got to actually do it. But I felt better after that Duke loss than I have at any point since they started playing the exhibition games.
Yeah, no, I agree. And medicine, we have the phrase, once is an anecdote, twice is a coincidence, and 3 times is a trend. Well, here we have 25 times it's a trend. Right. And so I think it's safe to say that, you have history on your side. And of course, no one could predict the future, but certainly you have historical reasons to feel less ill at ease than you have. So this is
at the very least, yes, there's not a reason to panic. And I understand the reasons why people are particularly tightly wound this year, but it's also not the first time and not the 10th time that I've seen these kind of reactions to this stuff. I've seen it every time. And that's why I say my line is no learning ever.
Yeah.
Because you can beat people over the head with this over and over and over again, that November losses do not mean anything in terms of predictive effect as to what the season is going to look like. They do not mean anything.
Yes.
But you can't, people forget this every year. And I know football's exacerbated this stuff, but that really, in a fundamental sense, has nothing to do with what's going on the hardwood. It
doesn't,
just
except make people a little bit more emotional, because not only is Michigan State's
football
program the dumpster, a dumpster fire, but also Michigan's is doing so well, right? I mean, everything's sort of aligned.
If you're gonna be that, then you're surrendering your rational faculties, and God help you if you're that fragile, But right, that's my take. But I do think this. There's one more thing I want to say on this, and we move on to Butler.
Great.
I think that there are a handful of people out there who have gone too far in the other direction, and I think have this notion that Tom Izzo almost kind of wants to lose these games.
Yeah, that's not right. Yeah.
That's not true at all. Tom Izzo wants. There used to be this debate over the Big Ten tournament. Izzo doesn't really care about it.
Yeah.
Okay. That's absolutely false. He wants to win every game he's ever coached. I'm positive of it. Any coach would. I don't think there's any coach out there, unless you're Brad Underwood, who says honestly, well, we wanted to lose this one because, but here's the thing. So it doesn't go that far, but the thing is, Tom Izzo has always understood that as much as he says, I want to hang banners, I want to win championships, and he does, and that applies to the Big Ten. But he has always understood that in this sport, ultimately, you are judged by what happens in March.
Yep.
You can wail about it, that it shouldn't be so, and no, the Big Ten still means something and all that, and it does. But I'm not saying anything that anyone who pays attention to this stuff shouldn't realize immediately. The way you are evaluated in this sport is based on what you do in March. Matt Painter has done a fantastic job as a regular season coach. Fantastic. I do not believe he is viewed as an elite coach. Why? He's viewed as a very good one, not an elite coach. Why is that the case? Because he hasn't done it in March.
Yep.
That's the truth. And I think, again, if you look over the course of Tom Izzo's tenure, it is true. I'm going to say at least 80% of the time, his teams are generally playing their best basketball at the end of the year. That's been true even of the last 3 years, which have been so disappointing to people, apparently.
Yep.
It's been true. Now, those teams weren't Final Four good, so their best wasn't good enough to get them there. But there's no argument that I would consider reasonable that they weren't at their best over the course of the season at the end. no matter what you think, that is not true for the majority of college basketball. There's a good argument. I could point to a lot of teams that people talk about, teams that win things occasionally, who are more often at their best in November and December than they are in March. That is a truth. So what I think he cares about, it's not about, well, I want to lose these games. Of course he doesn't. But when you look at the way he is always scheduled, he knows, because he's sane, that when you schedule the way he does, there's a reasonable chance you're going to lose some of these games because the opposition is consistently good. So you're going to get got somewhere along the line, right?
Sure.
And maybe 2 or 3 times along the line. A guy who schedules that way over and over and over does it for 2 reasons. One, he's not afraid of taking a loss. So we're not talking about Jim Boeheim, where he's scheduling every game at home and playing the Sisters of the Poor. He's scheduling real teams, sometimes on the road, a lot of times at neutral floors, where he can legitimately have a good chance of losing. And he schedules these games because they give his program a level check. You go through games against these kind of opponents, you find out where you're at. And that's necessary. If you go into conference play and you haven't played anybody, or you've played one difficult team, how do you really know what you are? And by the time you get into conference play and start discovering, oh, we're not as good as we thought we were, it might be too late.
Yeah.
Michigan State usually knows in November what they need to improve upon. And that is part of the formula. It's not about, well, we want to take a loss. It's that we're not afraid to take a loss in order to learn what we need to learn about ourselves.
Yep.
I think that's my opinion. I'm not stating that as fact, but that's my opinion. It's based on watching this for his entire tenure, and I absolutely believe it to my core that it's true.
Yeah, well, it certainly seems to be working. And I think, the other thing about that too is you can be a coach and you can know what the problems are and you can tell the players what the problem is, but until they experience adversity from the problem, they may not work to actually correct it. Right. And so that's what those sort of challenges, right. You have to go through those. It doesn't mean you want to lose. I'm sure he'd rather have beaten James Madison by a point and still be able to get the coaching aspect of what he needed out of that game. But like you said, there's a risk to playing games like that puts you potentially expose your weaknesses and your problems.
There's the old line about, well, it's obviously optimal to learn lessons while still winning. And of course, everybody would agree with that. But my response is, do you learn all the lessons you need to learn by winning? If you're a great team, if you're a truly great dominant team, like Indiana in 76, or, a couple of those early 90s Vegas teams, somebody like that, okay. Maybe you're good enough that you can learn all the lessons you need to learn and not need to take a loss, or not many of them, to get there. Most teams, I don't think that's the case. I'll remind you, the national championship team last year that Adam Zagoria thinks is God's gift to basketball.
They won the Big East,
didn't win their league. Yeah, they didn't win their league.
Yeah,
they didn't win the Big East. So Marquette did. So, that's not uncommon. Teams that win national titles, oftentimes they've gone through some adversity. So, and again, that's not to excuse any of this. I think we've been pretty forthright about the problems, and we'll continue to be. But you got to take a little broader view to really understand what all this should mean at this stage. That's my 2 cents at least.
Yeah. And I think, that's great philosophy just for life in general, because we often learn best when we fail.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
Right. Yeah.
It's psychology, right?
Yeah.
In your daily life, if you think about anybody listening to this, if you think about the course of your life, were you able to learn all the things you needed to learn just by having things go along swimmingly? Probably not.
Or even just by scraping by. You're like, "Ooh, I guess I don't need to." You don't. It does not sink in as much as if when you fail and like something actually you have a problem. So yeah,
you pay a price and you learn something from it. So and again, it's not that he's setting them up to have to go through that, but he is willing to risk it because I think his view is, you know what? If we win a game in November against a great team, great. It means we're probably pretty good at that stage, and it's an impressive win. It helps us, blah, blah, blah. But if we lose, that's okay too, because we're going to learn something from it. That's where I think his philosophy is. Not this, I want to take a loss, but more, I'm okay taking a loss because I think we can make use of that, which might actually benefit us as much or even more than winning down the road. He's not afraid of it. And that's why college basketball is a superior product to college football, by the way. You're
allowed to have mistakes.
They don't have to worry about, well, what does this loss, what does this one loss or two losses mean to me? Yeah. Does it eliminate us from anything? No, it doesn't.
Well, how about we talk about Butler?
Yep.
Butler's coached by Thad Matta, as many listeners remember. He used to be the head coach at Ohio State University. He's in his second year now back at school where he started before he went to Xavier and then it was Ohio State. They're having a good season so far. They're 3-0, 3 blowouts over some mid-majors to begin the season. 4 Butler stars are transferred this year, as a story that we seem to repeat many times now in these previews. The 5th transferred in before last season, and largely out of necessity, really. He's gone to the portal era, and he's kind of all in, as a lot of these teams, especially when you're in a more competitive league like the Big East, you really don't have time to fart around too much, which I think that's one of the problems that Minnesota's been facing. He wasn't left with much either when he started. So he had Lavelle Jordan was the previous coach, and they were not very good under him. So last year they were 14-18, 6-14, not very good. So there's plenty of opportunities to be better this season. Not expected to be super good, but at least off to a promising start to begin with. They're doing a good job generally taking care of the ball, shooting inside the arc. They've been struggling a little bit from 3, but not as much as Michigan State. They aren't rebounding offensively, and defensively they've been very good, which I think always the Thad Matta teams always were at Ohio State. That I recall.
Yep.
Little bit problems rebounding defensively as well. They generate some turnovers, limit opponents from 3s and 2s at a pretty good clip. Of course, the competition has not been super high level, so this is going to be their first real level check too, and obviously not Michigan State's.
Yeah, and that's the thing. We don't really know yet what to make of Butler's performance because they haven't played anybody. Now, to their credit, when you play teams like they've played, you want to smack them, and they've smacked them.
Yeah.
So that's good. But yeah, you generally have seen them, down at the bottom of Big East preseason projections. And that's reasonable because they didn't return much at all in the way of proven production. And the transfers they've added, I think 6 of the 10 are transfers in their rotation. I think I've got that right.
Mm-hmm.
If definitely 4 of the 5 starters are.
Yeah.
But other than maybe Posh Alexander, who we'll talk about in a second, none of them were big portal names. I mean, we're going to talk about one that all our listeners should know, Pierre Brooks.
Right.
Pierre Brooks is starting for them. Pierre Brooks transferred because he wasn't going to be in Michigan State's rotation. I mean, that's what we're talking about. That doesn't mean that he can't make that decision look bad, but that tells you why they were projected to finish where they were.
Right.
And at least the perception of the guys they've added. Now, I think he's done some interesting. Look, Thad Matta, to me, it's a dead heat between Thad Matta and Bo Ryan as to who I think is the second best coach in the Big Ten over Izzo's tenure. Dead heat. I think Bo Ryan had more consistency.
Mm-hmm.
Thad Matta slumped at the very end of his tenure, and a lot of that was due to health issues.
Yeah.
I think he lost some perspective on how he built his teams for most of his tenure. So he was still getting highly rated recruiting classes. But if you remember those teams the last couple of years he was there, they were very disjointed. He was recruiting nationally as opposed to Midwestern kids, which had really built. Yeah, he shared a lot of the same values in a basketball sense. And I think in terms of where he recruited, the types of kids he recruited with Izzo. I can think of that too. I don't think there was a better rival that Michigan State has had in the league over the Izzo tenure than Ohio State for, about an 8-year period.
Absolutely.
They were those games. Some of those games, I remember that 2011-2012 season, Draymond Green's senior year. They played 3 times. Every one of them was an absolute war, and they were great games. MSU won 2 of them. And there were a lot of those over the years. So I'm a fan of Thad Matta's. I think he's a very, very, very good coach. I think he did things the right way. I always sensed there was a lot of mutual respect between he and Izzo. And so I'm rooting, and you hate to see anybody. He was really very young. I mean, for a coach, when his back problems kind of, forced his firing, resignation, whatever they ultimately called it at Ohio State, I want to say he was only like 53.
Yeah.
54. He wasn't old. He's still not that old. He could still have another decade easy in him.
Mm-hmm.
No problem. But you hate to see that happen to somebody. And it was a complicated story. It had to do with a botched back surgery, I think, was what it was. I know his health problem was with his back, and I think it was actually a surgery for his back that is where it really went wrong. And I'm glad that he feels well enough to be back in it. And we'll see what he can do at Butler. He's the guy who really is responsible for elevating the Butler program. He was, and that's not to say they'd had no success or tradition before him, but he's the one who kind of put them on the map. And then you saw other guys after he left to go to Xavier kind of take that baton and keep them up there. And it culminated, Brad Stevens obviously had them at the highest level the program's ever achieved.
Yeah.
They went backward with Lavelle Jordan. And so Matta has come back to try to restore it. And I think they're going to have more patience with him than they would have with a lot of other people for obvious reasons. They should. But I think as long as he's healthy, I expect that eventually he's going to get that thing back on track. And they'll be competitive in that league.
There's every reason to think he will. So, let's go through the players and talk to you about the starters. And the lineup is brought to you by the Brothers of Just Two Gutters. If you're looking for gutter work or someone to take care of the problems you've got in your gutter, maybe you have a leaf problem, maybe you have, like me, and you have a tree growing in your gutter, whatever the problem might be, the Brothers of Just Two Gutters are the ones to take care of it. They specialize in just doing gutters. They don't do anything else. So they're very good at what they do. They can come in any type of weather, outside of a thunderstorm. They'll get up there and take care of whatever your problem is. If you just need it cleaned out, if you need leaf guards put on, if you need them repaired, if you need them replaced, whatever it is, residential, commercial, they will do it. They do fantastic work, fully insured. I can't recommend them enough. It's something we don't think about too much, but it's sort of like a zipper. You don't notice it until it's not working, and then you've got a real problem. So make sure you take care of your gutters. You can find them at brothersgutters.com. 10% off if you mention Final Four when you an estimate. You can go contact Kurt in the Grand Rapids area, or you can contact Greg in the Metro Detroit area. They will set you up and take care of you. And in a little bit, Rod will tell us who Michigan State's player they need to keep in the gutter on Butler is. So we'll begin with the starters. First is Pasha Alexander, 6-foot transfer from St. John's. And as you mentioned, we got a lot of transfers. He averaged 13.7 points a game on 54, 40, and 100 shooting so far, averaging 4.7 assists per game with a better than 2-to-1 assist to turnover ratio and a little over 2 steals a game. So he's definitely a guy you got to watch out for.
He's the pick for the guy to keep in the gutter.
He's the guy.
He's the guy. He's leading that. He's tied for the lead in scoring. He's their point guard. He's the guy on their roster who's played the most high level basketball. Pierre Brooks obviously was also in a high level program, but he didn't play the same. Pasha Alexander was a starter in the Big East, you know? So, the one thing about him, he's a key for them, obviously, and he's got to be good for them to be good. But, and Thad Matta teams, when you think about his teams at Ohio State, he had a lot of teams that had very high level point guard play. If you think about guys like, Mike Conley, Aaron Kraft, Shannon Scott, they had a lot of guys who were very good. And I felt like at the end, part of the reason it fell off is he was never able to find that point guard who could play at the level his previous guys did. So again, another parallel to Izzo. His good teams typically had very good point guard play. So Pasha Alexander needs to do that for Butler. The one thing I would say, I am skeptical of that 40% 3-point shooting. For starters, he's only averaging a little over 3 attempts per game. So he's 4 for 10, which is a decent amount, but it's not a boatload. He's never shot over 30% from 3 on his career. So I'm a little bit skeptical that he's all of a sudden become a 40% plus guy. That can happen, but it's rare. You don't expect it. So remains to be seen. But even if he's not hitting the jumper, he's very quick, experienced. He can create havoc. And so he's a guy Michigan State's definitely going to have to load up on.
And that's the player they're going to try and keep in the gutter, brought to you by the brothers at Just Two Gutters. So next is DJ Davis, 6'1" transfer from UC Irvine. He averaged 13.7 points a game on 55, 42, and 100 shooting. And he averaged 15 points a game at Irvine and has been a 40% plus guy from 3 in his past.
Yeah, so as opposed to Alexander, although he's only taken 2 more attempts from 3 than Posh has, I think Davis, the 3-point shooting is probably a little more sustainable at the level he's at because he's done it before. He's multiple seasons above 40%. Look, they brought him in because he was a good scorer at Cal Irvine. Not a great league, not a great level of play. So you don't always know how it's going to go when we talk about this all the time. When you step up in class as a transfer, how much is going to translate? But I think the early returns are good, and they're going to need him to provide that scoring punch for sure. Because they outside of Alexander, they don't have a lot of other proven scoring on this team. They've got guys that have done okay thus far, but not a lot of proven high-level scorers.
Next is 6'6" junior transfer Pierre Brooks, who transferred in from Michigan State. Pierre is averaging 13.3 points a game, 4 rebounds a game, shooting 44, 29, and 71. Well, that sounds a little familiar. He's definitely a starter, playing the wing, averaging a little over 25 minutes a game. So clearly, Matta is trusting him at this point to on both ends of the court.
Yeah, when I was doing the preview for this, I was thanking God because I hadn't followed it enough to know. I was thanking God that Pierre Brooks was not shooting 45% from 3 because the carping from the MSU fan base would have been mad.
Well, that's probably how you know it wasn't. He wasn't shooting 45%.
Right. Because if he was, you're right. You'd have had people squawking about it. Look, I like Pierre, and I was a big fan, as listeners to this podcast know, of him coming out of high school. I thought he had potential to become something of a Denzel Valentine type player in that I saw the potential for a lot of versatility. I thought he could shoot. I thought he was a good passer, and I thought he had a body and a mindset that should allow him to be a good rebounder. But the question coming in was going to be, how quickly did he pick it up defensively? And the answer was he never did.
Yeah.
And then he made matters worse. As last season went along, he got in worse condition, not better. I have seen footage of him, clips of him at Butler. It does not look to me like he is in anything more than marginally different shape.
Yeah.
right now. He's playing 25 minutes, but that doesn't mean they're 25 good minutes. He's scoring because he's apparently got a green light to shoot. And I get that they need scoring. So that's why I'm sure that's why Thad took a flyer on him, and he's going to give him every chance to be that third scorer that they need. I'm going to be very interested to see what he looks like defensively. Again, against poor opposition, Butler has defended very well as a team thus far. I want to see what he looks like individually, and we'll return back to that when we get to the keys. Right. But everybody knows what I'm alluding to.
Fourth starter,
the 3-point shooting has to be disappointing.
Yeah, well, 29.
Them,
it's not any better than at Michigan State. I mean, he was
right.
I mean, he was around
there.
His
first season, he showed better potential than that. Last year, he got off to a good start and then really fell off. And some of that you could write off to okay, he was playing sporadically, so you get how every time he does get some minutes, he's feeling a lot of pressure to make something happen, and it just kind of spirals and snowballs on itself, right? In terms of a lack of confidence. So you can write that off. But at Butler, it sure looks to me like he's got the green light. And, he's not, thus far, 3 games, very short sample size, small sample size, I should say. He is not looking any better as a shooter, which is weird because he's capable of being a very good shooter. That I know. That's not a guess.
Right. Jameel Telford is a 6'7", 225-pound transfer from Northeastern, averaging 11.3 points a game and 4 rebounds a game, shooting 39, 17, and 90. He was a good scorer at Northeastern, with double-digit scorer all 3 seasons. So I imagine he played with Tyson Walker.
1 year.
Yeah. So he's kind of like, along with Brooks, they probably sort of switch off at playing 3 of the 4 offensive and defensively.
Yeah. And that's where, not having seen them play yet, I don't know the answer. But I know this: if Pierre Brooks has got to play the wing, and frankly, with their roster composition, I think it's almost inevitable that he'll see at least some wing minutes. I don't have any idea who he guards.
Yeah,
if he's at the 4, he's got a better chance. But at the 3, I just and they might do that. This kid might be better built to do. But again, this kid's 6'7". Is he going to be a good defensive matchup against Jaden Akins to start the game? I don't know about that. Yeah. That's kind of the problem I see for Butler. But to me, these 2 players look like they could be more or less interchangeable at the 3 and the 4. But defensive reasons might necessitate playing Pierre more at the 4, at least on defense.
And finally, for starters, Jalen Thomas, 6'9" senior, played at UD High in Detroit. He's the one who's the only returning player, although he transferred in the year before from Georgia State. He had trouble with injuries, averaged 7 points and 4.7 rebounds a game. This year, he's averaging a little less, 5.3 points and more rebounds at 7.3 rebounds a game in 3 games.
Yeah, and I can't remember for certain if he played a year with Cassius Winston, if he was on that U of D state championship team as a freshman.
Oh, okay.
I can't remember for sure, but he had a good career, typical of young big guys who aren't the rare superstar types. It took him a while, but by the end of his time at U of D, he had become, a D1 prospect, and he did some time at Georgia State, ended up transferring to Butler. He's sharing that position basically, but he's playing, his role's expanded, I think, a little bit. And I think what he gives them is some stability in the paint. He's not, you don't have to worry about, Filipowski type stuff from Jalen Thomas. He's going to be around the basket.
He's what we call a regular 5.
He's part of, yeah, exactly. But he's part of what you're going to see, that they start a small lineup, but they've got a ton of size off their bench.
Yeah, we'll go with that
in their rotation.
Yeah, it's amazing.
So he's part of that. They can bring some legit size.
And we'll begin with that, talking about the reserves. We'll start with Connor Turnbull, 6'10" sophomore, averaging 7.3 points a game and 3.3 rebounds a game in about 18 minutes. So he plays about the same or even a little bit more than the Thomas we were just talking about. He's shooting 62, 38, and 100. I mean, although he's only made one three a game. And so he's obviously going to give him a lot of ability to stretch a little bit at the 5 spot over what Thomas brings.
I think he'll probably play more at the 4 because he's got that stretch ability.
Oh yeah, sure.
And they have another couple options actually at the 5. So they can, even though they're starting a smaller lineup, they will almost certainly get big. But you see why I'm saying when you've got that kind of roster composition, it's hard to imagine that Pierre Brooks doesn't at least have some stints on the floor where he's got to guard a 3. Now, maybe they'll try to match him up with MSU when Cohen Carr is in the game.
Oof.
Or maybe Trey Holloman, and think that they're going to get away with it. Maybe they will. But if he's got to guard Jaden Akins, that's not going to go well for them. So I think that's, for Butler, it's great that you've got all that size, but you might also have some matchup. And also, we'll have to see how a guy that big could match up with Malik Hall.
Right, absolutely. He's got to play both sides. Yeah.
So,
well, move on from 6'10" to 7'1" transfer from Bucknell, Andre Screen. He's averaging 7 points a game, 5 rebounds a game, and a little over 3 blocks a game, shooting 100% from the floor. I imagine a lot of dunks, and 71% from the line in 12 minutes a game.
12 minutes a game, and he's averaging more than 3 blocks per. Now, again, they're playing bad opposition.
Right.
But this is a guy who had a really nice career at Bucknell.
And that's usually a pretty good program.
Blocked a lot. Yeah, blocked a lot of shots there. In fact, I'm trying to think. No, I guess it would have been just after because MSU faced Bucknell in 2018.
Wow, your memory is amazing.
In the tournament. And before they lost to Syracuse. Right. They beat Bucknell. Yeah. So that would have been before this kid got to Bucknell. But yeah, that's been a very steady program. And so he was an effective player there. So I think, he and Jalen Thomas are primarily sharing that 5 spot. But again, both of those guys can give them legit rim protection. I mean, having a 7-1 guy is a big, that you can see how Matta has built this team to try to at least physically be able to hang in there in the Big East. Mm-hmm. When he's playing UConn or Villanova or any of these teams, you need some bigger bodies, and he's got them.
He's got plenty now.
We'll see how good they are. But there's reason to think that their interior game can be okay.
Next is 6'3", sophomore transfer from St. Francis, Landon Moore. He was a part of the NEC all-rookie team last year, and so far this year he's averaging a little over 6 points a game on 39, 46, and 44 shooting.
Yeah, and I don't expect the deep shooting numbers to stay quite that elevated, but look, there's a reason why he was on the all newcomer team and why he's in Butler's rotation, because Thad knew they needed some more firepower there, even if it's coming off the bench. And he'll be an important guy probably all year long.
And next is Finley Bizjak, a 6'4" freshman from Texas, averaging 4.3 points a game on a blistering 29, 10, and 50 shooting numbers in 21 minutes a game. So he was a decent recruit for Butler, considering where they were, and he's just around the top 100
in ESPN's ranking, not consensus, but still.
Yeah. Good player.
That's an important sign. I don't think we'll see how it goes, but I would tend to think that Thad Matta, at the very least, would like more of a mix of guys he's recruiting out of high school and developing, and then you supplement that with guys from the portal. Yeah. I'd be surprised if his MO was, I just want to reinvent the wheel every year. I maybe I'll be wrong, but that's my hunch. And so getting a guy out of Texas, by the way, not normal Butler recruiting territory, that was a we'll say at the very least a borderline top 100 guy. That's important. He hasn't shot the ball well at all thus far, but he's playing 21 minutes a game. So that tells you something about how they view him.
And finally, Bowden Kopke, 6'11", 260-pound freshman, averaging 11 minutes a game, 3.7 points a game, and 4 rebounds a game.
Yeah, another big body, and they're somehow finding, I think it's the three-headed monster thus far at the center. We'll see. I mean, when you add them all up, all three of those guys, it adds up to about 40 minutes. We'll see if that continues. But this is a kid they got out of Minnesota, and they feel good about his potential down the road. He's the biggest of them from a weight perspective.
Yeah, he's huge.
But it will be interesting to see how the minutes evolve. And because we haven't seen Butler play anybody with a pulse yet, really, we don't know yet for sure if that's going to be how it goes or if it will eventually move to more of the two veterans sharing that spot. We'll just have to see.
Sure.
But for now, he's got a 10-man rotation, and this kid's been in it. I would think he wants to give him a chance because, again, I don't believe that Thad Matta wants to have a program that just, is churning every year. I think he would like to have multi-year guys. And so to have 2 true freshmen in his rotation is a potential benefit to him as he builds this thing.
Yeah, and you imagine too, in the Big East, you're a little bit less susceptible to transfers off your team. Yeah, with the assumption that they're playing. And so, so I think you're more likely to keep those guys around for the 4 years. So let's talk about the 5 keys to the game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. Nudge Printing is run by Gabe and Brittany. They are Spartan alums. They run everything out of Portland, Michigan. So it's all Michigan-made products, high quality apparel. You can get super soft t-shirts and long sleeve t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, whatever you need. All kinds of cool Spartan vintage logos, current logos, whatever you want. It's really, Nudge has it all. Great stuff just to toss on, head to the bar, go to the restaurant, go out to eat or something like that. Tailgating, whatever you might need. Fantastic stuff. Free shipping on orders that are decent size. And you get 20% off your order if you type in Final Four on your order. That's at the Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com. They print all our stuff. So if you want our logo gear with our new logo, you can go over to actually, the easiest way to find it is our collection is just go to the Final Four is on the schedule.com/merchandise. And there you can find ways to order t-shirts or hoodies. They're really cool, green. I wore them last year shooting free throws at halftime. All right. So 5 keys to the game. Number 1, get the offense humming. So we saw that in the second half, not so much in the first half against Duke, but can you do that for a little bit, sustain it for more than just like small bursts?
I think the last 2 games, Michigan State was not buried coming out of the chute, but that was largely down to their defense. The offense wasn't good against either Southern Indiana or Duke. And so the next step is that they come into the game from the jump more efficient and effective offensively. And that means in general, I think more penetration from the guards, better man movement, better ball movement, better screening. You do enough of those things, shots are going to fall.
Yeah. Well, and then go to second key to the game, on the boards. So Butler has quite a bit of size, although we saw on the starting lineup, their biggest player is 6'9", but they'd have a lot of size in the bench. But they're having a lot of trouble rebounding. Michigan State done okay on the boards. They looked okay, especially offensively on the boards against Duke, and decent defensively. And so, this is a spot where we have every reason to think that they're going to be better. They've already shown signs they're better, but I think they can be a lot better than they have even been to this point. And so, can you exploit that with Butler and get a couple extra chances and prevent Butler from getting second chances?
Yeah, their offensive rebounding rate is lower than I would have expected, mostly due to the Southern Indiana performance, because they were pretty good against James Madison and even against Duke. 35%. They were okay. Yeah, that's not, if that was your season number, You would take
Sure.
that. That would be solid. It wouldn't be anything spectacular by Michigan State historical standards, but it would represent real improvement over last season's debacle in that area. So look, I think it's if you're talking about a team that is struggling to score, one way you help solve that in terms of point production is you get on the offensive glass and you score some second chance points. And we saw Michigan State do a little of that against Duke. And they tended to come at timely moments where they really needed a bucket. Jaden Akins had a couple of them. That's a good sign. They did some things in that area. They got a 3 off an offensive rebound.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember who it got swung to. Maybe it was to Jaden also. It was a first half Carson Cooper offensive rebound that he secured, and the ball went around the horn, found Jaden, and he nailed the 3. Michigan State needs to do more of that. And at least statistically, thus far, it's the one thing Butler has not done well in these tomato can games is they haven't rebounded well at either end. So based on that, you would think there might be an opportunity, but it's a little early to call things a trend. So we'll see.
Yeah, we're not quite at the trend stage. Still with the coincidence stage right now. And then just as an example, last season Michigan State they had a 28% offensive rebounding percentage. So that just shows you how poor the offensive
35 would be a huge step
35
up.
would be a huge improvement. All right, so
significant.
The number 3 key of the game, he's back, AJ. So, I mean, can he build on what he looked better last game right? I mean,
it's funny. I will as listeners know, I've been a critic of AJ's for quite a bit of his career. I also think that I've been pretty fair, and when he's played well, I've said so. And I understand how important he is to this team, which is an acknowledgement that, this guy is capable of doing some very, very good things. I don't think any of that's changed. I think he's not their best player, but he's their most important player. And if you want, there are a number of things going on with Michigan State right now. But if you asked me to point to one big thing, the one most important thing as to why MSU has been disappointing thus far, it's AJ Hoggard. Now, all that said, judging by some of the stuff I saw on social media and on the message boards yesterday after the Duke game, I felt like I've been ahead of a lot of the fan base in AJ criticism. And I feel like maybe I'm a little bit ahead. I hope I'm ahead in terms of looking at the game he played yesterday and actually being okay with it. It wasn't brilliant. When you go 1 for 8 from the floor, when you have a couple of defensive lapses as he had in the second half, you can't say, well, that was a great game. But he had 8 assists to 2 turnovers, and it is not a coincidence that when he started playing and facilitating better in the second half, Michigan State's offense was on the uptick.
Yep.
Now, some of that was attributable to Tyson Walker individual brilliance, but not all of it. AJ had a hand in that too. And AJ even had a hand in some of what Tyson was able to do. So I felt there were, and his defense, you could talk about a couple of blown moments in the second half, but the first 10 minutes in particular, he was elite defensively. Yeah. So he showed signs for the first time this year, and I'm including the exhibition games. This is the first time this year that I looked at AJ's overall floor game and felt, okay, I'm seeing signs of who he needs to be for this team. There were real tangible positives about the way he played. Can he build on that? Because the Duke performance was just showing some positive signs. It didn't mean he was anywhere close to arriving. You know, we know what arrival for AJ looks like the way he did in the NCAA tournament, or at times in the second half of Big Ten play last year. That's what arriving looks like for him. So he's nowhere close to that yet. but can he build on that Duke game, on the positives, start sanding the rough edges off some of the negatives, and get back to where they need him to be? He apparently said to Izzo in the locker room after the game, if I don't play better than this, bench me. Okay, well, that's at least saying the right thing. That's at least verbalizing that you want to and expect to be held accountable, which is progress, I guess. But at this point, I'm just more concerned with what shows up on the actual court, because we're past the my bad phase.
Yeah, you're a senior,
you know?
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He's a senior.
Fourth key to the game, transition. So Michigan State, I mean, obviously transition is key. This is something that we've expected a lot more of this season. We've seen some more, but I think not probably as much as either of us expected. And then, Butler seems to be playing fast, but we'll see if Michigan State can exploit them. And with looking at especially some of their size, you think, boy, might be some opportunities here.
I hope so. I mean, Thad Matta certainly knows what the Michigan State transition game looks like.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he will be harping and working with his team to prioritize floor balance, especially since they're not a good offensive rebounding team anyway.
Yeah.
So they will try, but Michigan State has got to still be insistent and push. And I thought at times against Duke they did that, and then at other times I didn't think they did that. That needs to be more consistent, and it's on those point guards above and beyond anybody else, but it's also on, bigs have got a rim run. Wayne's have got to get out and run those lanes. All that stuff's got to happen, but it starts with the point guards really being insistent and pushing. I just think, again, when you're struggling shooting the ball, well, you got to do anything. What are the two ways you can keep three ways you can keep your offense humming if you're not hitting jumpers? You can get to the foul line, you can get second chances via offensive rebounds, you can get in transition. Yep. So they really only did one of those things okay against Duke, and that was second chance points. They outscored Duke in transition, but it was only 11-1.
Yeah, it wasn't what you
fast
expect,
break points. So it didn't big edge, but not enough points to really matter in the aggregate,
Mm-hmm.
So transition is part of what's got to happen.
All right. The fifth key to the game, which you sort of hinted at before, attack Pierre. We know him well. We know his limitations, and from, your 2 minutes of scouting and looking what he looks like, he looks the same as he before. And so our expectation is he's probably the same limitations that he had when he was at Michigan State.
I don't think there's reason to believe that the conditioning is much different. I don't see it visually. I didn't see evidence of that. So it's not like there are guys, we saw AJ Hoggard look thinner. It's all right. Hunter Dickinson looks like he's in better shape. He looks like he's in the best shape of his college career right now at Kansas. It's noticeable to me visually. I didn't see that with Pierre.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Thad's always been, and again, I haven't seen them play. Thad had always been a man-to-man guy. I would kind of be surprised if they were leaning on a lot of zone to hide guys. That doesn't seem to be Thad's historic MO, but maybe that's going on some. I don't know. But if Pierre is out there playing somebody man-to-man, I don't really care who it is. They got to look to go at him. If they try to go some minutes with him guarding Jaden Akins needs to be in attack mode, and MSU needs to be swinging the ball to him every possession. If he's guarding Malik Hall, Malik has got to look to take him in the post because he's a little bigger than Pierre, and I think he can take him down there. Just in general, anybody guarding Pierre, MSU has got to be looking to attack him. And we'll see where it goes.
I'm trying to think of someone he can effectively guard. And I feel like, if he tries to guard AJ or Hum, he's going to really struggle against
maybe Cohen Carr or Xavier Booker, because those guys aren't, in Xavier's case, he's just not comfortable enough offensively to where he's going to, he's likely to do a lot of damage, although maybe a few minutes against Pierre would get him on track. In Cohen's case, you want somebody who can either, do something to attack Pierre. So you want somebody who can go off the dribble against him and abuse him there, or somebody who could take him on the blocks and do damage. Cohen right now is kind of an opportunistic scorer.
Yeah.
So he's mostly going to be a guy that, okay, they get him on a lob, they get him in transition, he gets a putback. That's primarily how he's going to score. So I would not be surprised if they kind of look for opportunities to play Pierre by guarding somebody like Cohen Carr.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. It'll be an interesting game. And this is certainly no cupcake. And as you pointed out, it would have been kind of nice getting a get-right game before you have another tough game. But, the schedule is what it is. It's not the hardest team that you could probably play.
Exactly. And I do believe that. That's just circumstance. But on the other hand, you get a win against Butler, and and then you got almost a week. You got 6 days until you see Arizona. So if they can get this one and play well, that's the biggest thing. Play well. Then I think you can start to feel some of those green shoots are popping up.
Well, this has gone a little bit long, so we're going to, I think, leave it there because I don't think we have much more to add. We'll talk to everyone after the Butler game. Again, reminder to check out Nudge Printing at nudgeprinting.com or the Brothers at Just Two Gutters. You can find contact information for Kurt and Greg if you're in the Metro Detroit or the Grand Rapids area in the podcast player below, or on our website at thefinalfoursontheschedule.com. Just look in the episode description. You can find contact information for both those gentlemen. Also, a little of note, we're going to be doing a college campus tour. I'm going to do a college tour with my son. He's going to be checking things out before the game, so we'll do that on Friday evening beforehand, so we get to see a little bit of the dorms. I don't know if we get to go to eat dorm food or something like that, but we'll see what goes on. So anyways, we'll talk to you guys afterwards. Until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.
Now you can join Planet Fitness and get the PF Black Card for zero enrollment, $24.99 a month, and get all the perks.
I love perks.
Do you love having access to 2,000 plus locations?
Yes.
Bringing a friend every time?
# friend goals.
And recovering with massage chairs?
Who doesn't?
Get the PF Black Card and feel spectacular. Zero enrollment, $24.99 a month. See Club for details.